Okay, so today is what they call is called the Shabbos. It's the fourth commandment. Even making this tiny little video recording, it's not really a prohibition, but because it's actually for the sake of Torah, so one could say it could be it's actually encourages what's called a longer video. Um, Before that, let me. My name is Andrew Graham or Andrew C. Graham, and I have a couple of small startups. They're called pre-launch. I used to run two or three companies back in the day. Previous worker at Citrix, things of that sort. I've been falsely accused of something. Um, perhaps Avodah Zarah. That's about it. I converted. I didn't officially convert, but I started studying Torah. One could say at the before I arrived to the world. It's a little bit kabbalistic, pun intended. And my mother's Jewish. I'm Jewish. Um, my other three brothers and sisters are Jewish. Um, there's a question that comes after that, though. There's a saying in Judaism. I say Judaism. Other people say way of Torah. There's a difference between all these things depending on how much you've studied. Other people say a student of Torah. Other people say the question is often more important than the answer. The answer is also more important than the question. It's called a paradox. Judaism, to say it simply, since I'm making this recording, or pure study of Torah, as we'll note in Parshat Chukas here in a second, in the Stone Edition, the Simple Stone Edition, the simple yet well refined and thought out Stone Edition of the Torah. There's a Reuben Edition. There's a Stone Edition. I'd also like to gratefully thank a rabbi who, without this rabbi and without some of the attendees of the synagogue, my articulate way to describe religion would not exist. I was really good at business, and I still am. Worker at Citrix. Both of my small startups scaled to actually the valuation, in my own opinion, my estimation of the two startups was about at its height, pun intended, in the mid portion of 2013 on the Greek Gregorian calendar, is on the Jewish calendar. What is that? That's I don't know what it is on the Jewish calendar. 5,900, 5,000. Anyways, the point is 5,780, 5,780, something like that. 81, 82, almost in correspondence to my birthday. What's your date of birth? These things are important in Judaism. So I'm going to get to the Torah study, but I wanted to, since this is the first time ever doing extended recording, mainly due to storage space, I was saving a bunch of recordings on my phone. The the events that I was always I was studying Torah, pure Torah. What is pure Torah? What is a Jew? So I'm going to ask a question that will clarify and hopefully explain successfully the question, what is a Jew? The answers to these questions, what that simple question is pervasive, is interwoven throughout the entire Stone Edition of the Torah, all the 5 books of Moshe, the prophets, the Nabis, the Tosfos, the Zohar, the Talmud, the Midrash, the Gemara, the prayer book, the Siddurs, the holidays, the rabbinical holidays, the sayings of the sages, the ethics of, the ethics of the fathers, things like that. I'm going to share something real quickly. It's really not that personal. People actually know these things have happened. I've endured, survived, depending on your interpretation. And I'm not for sure if it's because while wearing a yarmulke and tzitzit and saying right prayers, I was unfortunately taken to the inaccurate location recently, in my opinion, to a gross negligence. It was really gross negligence, believe it or not, from a legalistic standpoint, whether you like it or not. Extremely gross negligence on behalf of a private company. Then multiple violations by a government sanctioned force, one could say, in multiple states. It was their fault, 100%, whether you like it or not. And however, the accusations post facto were again gross negligent. There's joint and severable liability. The conundrum is it involves multiple states. However, the actual incidences occurred in a specific state. I'm not going to say what year this occurred to or who. It was with somebody with my name. And then obviously a false accusation with absurd description and things of that sort. Multiple unfortunate things that occurred at a government sanctioned area. If you look at my profile, you will a great attorney. I'm a great attorney. Okay, well, a lawyer, I should say. I attended law school, so I know the difference between things. Okay, so there's going to be a sizable lawsuit against you guys. I've had 5 attempted either thievery where I was attacked physically, 5 or 6. The dog's not that big of a deal, but sometimes the dogs were released on purpose by whoever. A mentor of mine recommended not to go to these kosher cheese shops or the kosher hamburger places run by these people. That was what my friend said, Sheldon. He said, don't bother to go there. I was like, well, why is that? He didn't bother to explain the reasons why. Anyways, both that one specific shop had a severe violation against me leading up to these occurrences that happened in another state. And I've actually, I endured 5, one could, I'm not going to say attempted murder because it wasn't what really happened, but potentially. However, it can't be viewed as that because there was no actual contact. I've actually been almost whatever. One time in Nevada, attacked literally by another human being while wearing tzitzit and a yarmulke. One time on Shabbos. The law enforcement individual failed to identify me at all. They were literally right there within like 10 seconds. This was in Nevada, Las Vegas. They did not ask for my ID. I spoke to the individual face to face. Then post facto, for months, I walked around while enforcement of those law enforcement, local, meager, low-level law enforcement, in my opinion, harassed me on multiple occasions. Then at a restaurant was kicked out, brutally kicked out, for no reason whatsoever. They knew who I was. I'd been eating there for a while. The kosher cheese shop named Simon and Joe's was forced to close or closed on purpose. I don't know the reasons shortly thereafter. And mind you, I've studied this book, the Torah, officially since 2015. I started studying the Torah, officially opening up the books in Korea in 2015. In 2013, I left my job at Citrix on almost the exact day of Ovadia Yosef's passing, former chief Sephardi rabbi in Israel, passed away in October, I think 13th, 2013. I started studying Torah. I left my job in November, I think November 11th, 11th or 12th, 2013. I was falsely accused in Nevada of something without proof. I was accused of something and also put it in a place. I studied Torah in a garage for about 8 years while attempting to find a livelihood to fund my work for about 8 or 9 years. Then I studied Torah again while being allowed. My father's Happy Father's Day, by the way, is and my mother have been a source of strength and provide me with revenue. Reason why I'm able to survive financially, in the world. However, during that time, some scenarios occurred that are extremely questionable involving them, and that's unfortunate. I don't know. I don't know how to navigate those scenarios successfully. I'm just telling you a sequence of events. I was labeled post facto. I accidentally violed the. I guess now, looking back, I realized I called the wrong individuals because their job was they were unaware. However, I felt it was my obligation because my other family members had also done things to me that would have been ended in their incrimination if they showed up immediately and if the accurate truth was to be said at that specific moment. My sister's former husband, that wasn't that severe. It was just yelling and things like that, with a threat of violence, at close range. Specifically, my other sister's husband wasn't a threat of violence, but thought it was more of a joke, but the joke went to, I guess, absurd levels. That individual has least amount of violations with me, I guess. I can't say that for my nieces and nephews who I don't really know. My brother doesn't have any specific violations against me. He just had some funny accounting, I guess, at times. But this was before I started officially studying the Torah book. I studied the Torah with my friend Brandon, whose father designed weapon systems, supposedly, so he says, for the Israeli government and other governments of the world. And my college roommate was his name was Dave. Yeah, his nickname was Stove. Was supposedly, I don't know whether he was fully Jewish or half Jewish or something like that in college. And post-college, we were, I guess, we almost went into partnership on something, on something. And his goal was really being an entrepreneur. At the time, mine was like, look, I'm just trying to make as much money as I can. If it's a business, that's great. If it's a job, it's a job and a business. It's even better. If it's something else, that's fine too. I've reached out to various enforcement in some states recently without arrival on location. Believe it or not, and this is after being labeled something unfairly. I was forced for a while, almost forced, to take some things that were not kosher. Obviously, they were not kosher. I was a keeper of kosher. I also ate other, at times, non-kosher food because kosher restaurants were not available, or maybe sometimes I didn't have the exact amount of funds to purchase kosher, but I would have kept kosher with ease, just so you know. And so those are the meager violations. Some people say that they performed these things for the sake of they didn't know what to do. They said, well, they took time to try to figure things out. Now, during that time, I had, in Nevada, there was multiple agencies. There was an absurd call that happened where I've been illegally frisked probably 6 to 8 times by local law enforcement without having anything on me. My father was mocked. My mother was mocked at their location on several occasions. Now I'm going to go into Torah study. And now we mock you. So this is an extreme warning. I actually reached out to a few attorneys in Nevada and Los Angeles to no avail specifically. Believe it or not, the Simon Law Firm, and also a a few meager law firms in Nevada, supposedly. So, my sister also has a conundrum with these, with the occurrence in Santa Barbara when she was 27 or 28. I was there. She was something unfair that had happened to her. In my meager opinion, she was just being stubborn. Perhaps it could have been handled differently at that specific moment, but things happen how these things happen. So that's exactly what that's the scenario. I was not there with four other family members in other states. I'm just telling you the exact sequence of events. Fortunate for me, I was a student of Torah, and I've made meager short recordings of simple tidbits of information that are contained in the Torah. However, I made a longer recording about investment paperwork and things like that. And however, this is something that's when it comes to the Torah, since I've studied for that many years, like I mentioned, I sat and I also would travel about applying for jobs and things like that for 8 or 9, 10, or for 12 or 13 years. Sometimes there was some shops or businesses that would give me an interview, or go on the interview, but I didn't necessarily have enough money to move there right away, so it became after a while somewhat of a pointless endeavor. I stayed, I restayed in where I'm from in Santa Barbara, that's where my technical location is. I have not yet relocated to another state. Sometimes I've stayed in Boulder City, and sometimes near Chicago and Peoria, Illinois. My father was a pastor in Peoria, Illinois. He was a pastor in Santa Barbara and a pastor in Boulder City, with various members of the church holding different roles, positions, things of that sort. So I did not have the same communication networks that my father did. With that being said, I'm not for sure how anything would be ruled, but actually I do know what I would deserve. So just so you know, and so do basically everybody on planet Earth. So with that being said, I'm extremely grateful for the amount of space-time continuum, pun intended, that I've been allowed to study the Torah. However, it becomes I'm not going to say it's simple for me, but it somehow I had a good enough brain to study the Torah. So again, what is a Jew? So this week's Torah portion is Chukas. In the Stone Edition, is what is it? It's called Numbers Bamidar or something. Numbers chapter 19, and so we find a pure source in the book chapter 19. But before that, there's a hierarchy to the books. Okay, so the hierarchy of books when it comes to Torah, and this is pure Torah, just so you know. The source for pure Torah in chapter 19, and this is in the commentary of the Stone Edition, is Ecclesiastes 7, chapter 7, and Job, I think chapter 12 or 14 or something like that. So just like last week, Hirsch Goldworm was, I think, the only time he's ever mentioned in the Torah. Rarely is a pure source. They call it a pure source, and this is where it's a little bit funny. Before I go into that, the first 5 paragraphs are somewhat interesting. In the last paragraph of the first sentence, on the commentary, on the first page on the Stone Edition, it talks about the Torah is mysterious, and so I'm going to explain some of the mystery. This is a portion of the explanation of mysterious Torah. So there's a reason why there's the Torah, there's the beginning at the beginning. The Torah has a hierarchy of books and a hierarchy of explanations, some more mystical than others, depending on the root of somebody's soul and the reason for their existence. Do you know why you even exist on planet Earth? So some of your reason for existing on planet, every person has a reason for existing on planet Earth. We are all important, Baruch Hashem. You see, all of us are important. Tikkun Olam is an important concept because in the beginning of the day, the tikkun of a soul, the healing of a soul, is emphasized more or less by some movements. So other movements of the religion say pure Torah study is important. Some people would say, but that's contained within Tikkun Olam, the root of the soul. The soul arrives to planet Earth. It has its own source. Whoever their parents are, we all have parents. Happy Father's Day, Happy Mother's Day. We all have parents. Everybody on planet Earth has a father and mother. Everybody. Some know them, some don't. I did a study about when did I actually get to know my parents. Well, this is after a scenario occurred. I didn't really know them. I knew them. They raised me. We got along pretty well. We were like good as long as I had my job and I had my, I was doing, if I was successful according to the, I got this present for my brother. He didn't value it that much, but he valued it. He's like, this is when I had nothing. Or I arrived back from Los Angeles after surviving this thing, and it was an interesting scenario. I bought this off Amazon for my brother Gregory. Baruch Hashem. I use it now because I don't really use it that much, but this is actually a present for my brother Gregory. He doesn't have it. He doesn't keep it with him. He says, I'll let you keep it there. This is his. Reminds me of his water pack. He was Air Force Special Forces. He was in the reserves, but then he was called up to be Special Forces, painting targets and things like that. He didn't go to Afghanistan. He refused to go because of his family. Scenarios occurred after that. The ironies in my brother Gregory's life are almost as fascinating and interesting as some of the ironies in my life. The reasons for that perhaps are different. In my opinion, my brother Gregory is 100% innocent. There was no proof. There just wasn't. I got a phone call when I was in San Diego. I was at a shop, and I didn't even know the burrito shop. It was near the near the Tijuana Otay Mesa on the San Diego side. There was a Starbucks over there, and right down the road, I had this little storage unit. Some of my things were in there. And I got a call that said my brother did something and he's being accused of things. And I know how my aunt is. My father has a sister, an aunt, and she's really smart, and she's even a Spencer and things like that, but she didn't have necessarily any as much education as the others. So it's not her fault. And she's up there in age. Her husband passed away, so they told me not too recently. I met him again right after I re-arrived in Illinois in 2023. 2023 or something, for a couple of seconds, and supposedly he passed away. May God have mercy on his soul. But when I arrived here, I did not have anything because I was looking for work the entire time. I was trying to get jobs. I applied to lots of other places, and then I decided to be an entrepreneur and make a business go. I figured a lot of cool things out, and I have opportunities available at Automation Anytime, and maybe with Kosher Law. I've got a lot of ideas, and I'm working on those things. So Baruch Hashem. So the previous statements that I said, it is not that important. I'm just letting you know because those things did happen. Okay, those things did happen. So some people say they took me over because maybe they were worried I had head damage after being punched, but I also had a bad bicycle accident where I won a lawsuit in Los Angeles. There could be a number of reasons. Anyways, the point is the entire time I studied Torah. Yes, that's the point. Sometimes I become a little bit litigious because I know the law. I went to law school and I studied law. This book is contained in law, so it helps one think along those lines. But this is something that I got from my brother. Now, with my brother, in my meager opinion, he either is 100% innocent or, I don't know, 95% innocent. And it's important you put a variance to the level of innocence of a person, because what he was accused of post facto and the things that happened post facto, it causes me grief. It causes me grief. It brings sadness to my soul. Because of the inaccuracies that exist in the world, especially in America. And I got thinking, how many more people out there like that have scenarios? And my father knew. This is why my father, he was strict with me, and he let these things happen to me without getting too upset, because he was a pastor. and of lots of different places. And he said, son, I have met people, whether they say true things to me or not, that they're worse off than you. And I was like, oh, really? Is that what you think? Maybe, but they did not suffer under the weight of. I suffered under the weight of knowing what should have been done and did not happen. Some of these people that my father met, I've met some of these people too, but probably more with him because he actually knew the weight of their grief. My father also has a weighty level of grief. So when he prays the Kadosh Baruch Hu, there's a portion of the Torah specifically designed for him, regardless of his beliefs, regardless of his religion, regardless of his heresy. Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the creator of the universe, he hears those prayers. There's a special place in Shemaim, it says in our books. Whether they know the words in Hebrew or anything, he hears those prayers. They are expressed direct to heaven for the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the master of the universe, to consider these weighty words, these weighty prayers. They know around here and things like that. So this is a gift that I got from my brother Gregory after Los Angeles. I did not have any money when I believe me, I was looking for jobs. It was difficult. And the entire time, the only contract that I had was with my family. My father, Baruch Hashem, and my mother, I still have my contract with them for my business because I'm supposed to, and sometime in the future, help out the nieces and nephews to make $1 gazillion or something like that. He said he hates the world of law because it's riddled with injustice. I was like, that's true, Father, but what does it say? Even the Noahide laws say, set up courts of law and courts of justice. But what if there's no right or wrong answer? And I was like, well, this is the point of these things, to improve the world to Kin Olam, you see. So I know for a fact that when you don't have much money, you'll do something small for somebody when you don't want to. When the root of your soul is against what you are actually doing or saying for somebody. Let's say you're, and all of a sudden you see somebody somehow deserves compassion or mercy, and you say something good on their behalf, or you do something good for them. Even though you don't know any of these complicated rules, I'm going to explain some of the Torah here in the second parsha, Chukas, right? Because what is a Jew? To answer that question real simply, what is a Jew? The study of Torah makes a person a Jew. You understand? However, also in Nida 9a, it is also a blood, it's a bloodline. So Sephardim from Spain, south of Spain, and also potentially the north of Spain, a little bit, like 25%. My mother is 25 or 30 or 40%, like that. So that makes me what? 20%, 15 to 20%. Because we have Baca, B-A-C-A in the family line, and we also have the Romeros. The Romeros were in the Spanish Catholic records. My uncle, great uncle, who was a major in the Air Force and Jug Advocate General, he served in Turkey for a while. He did a lot of that study, and he made this, he bothered to compile some of these, whatever he could find in the libraries, this little book. And then also my grandfather actually distributed this book. He was the Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force in Korea, and who was in Hawaii at Edwards Air Force Base. I think at Anders Air Force Base. I went to Vandenberg and an Air Force Base in Texas, and also I've been on the Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Because he was there. I stayed at an Air Force Base with him in Texas one time. That was a cool time when I drove him to his third wife, Pat. She was a VP of an oil company out there in Tulsa, Pat Bird. And I drove him out there when I was in Mexico. This is one of the things where whatever happened to my brother Gregory. I got that call from my brother Gregory, and I was like, Greg, I can fly you out here to Mexico. Because there was no proof, as far as I know. He got accused of roaming around on the carpet and putting his finger next to, pointing his finger at somebody. And the grief that it caused me, because the time, because of potential politics or however they thought about things, they were worried about, their job was to protect, they did their job really well. But the problem with doing their job really well, imagine if you're like a advanced kung fu fighter, and the person, you see is like just not. I'm not. I know how to train and stuff like that, but I never learned how to do those things. Not really. And if you know me, I would be killed. I wouldn't fight because I know I'm strong and things like that. And I don't have an inclination to do those things back. I just don't, or towards them. You see, it's just a habit I used to do for sport when I was a young kid. You know. So, but these other people who actually know how to do those things, you know, in the same way, I read something, saw something. Sometimes people bad things happen to them. There's no excuse for that, but it happens all the time. It happens like that. Okay, so these some of the inventions and things that I'm working on, it's designed to try to figure out how to resolve those things before they happen, so those things can be avoided. You see, it's called an improvement of the world. I so in a similar way, perhaps they these things happen and there's just it's a system of law that exists and it's the best that we could people could do. So people have opinions one way or the other, and then if you make an appeal, they have to the various areas have to accept it. But if people kind of know it is some things are the unfair, then they kind of say, well, we know that's a little bit unfair. What are we supposed to do about it? Okay, yeah. We did what we could, and plus in the future, if something bad happens again, or if let's say if something unfortunate happens and I can't find any sort of livelihood, I can say, well, at least maybe at some point, I can say that, well, maybe I would be begging to have something bad happen to me. That way, so it was to my benefit. But if I win some other thing in some other country or whatever, because some people they earn money, they can earn money from that eventually. If something bad happens to them or whatever, they can earn money from the government because they fund those programs. So it's complicated. That's not my job. I'm going to explain the Torah here in just a second. But this is something I bought right after arriving from LA. I bought it off Amazon. It was from my brother Gregory. You see, he didn't understand. Maybe he understood, but maybe he was a little bit upset because of his scenario in life. He thought he got a lot of unfair things happen to somebody. They get down on themselves, and as I mentioned, I met my mother and father actually as people, as humans, when I think I met my father was about 27 or 28 when I actually first realized that when as a young lad I grew up spiritually and I had held jobs and I did investments and things like that and managed people, and so when I was shaking the hand of my father and talking to him, it was like I was talking to him as me as a human, more developed and things like that, spiritually and emotionally and things like that. I had my girlfriend and things like that, my investments, and I was whatever. So when I was talking to my father, I was talking to him on too close to equal footing, you see, like how I would actually communicate with somebody. I didn't really know my mother. I, I took care of my mother. My mother, Baruch Hashem, she was my mother. But I didn't really understand anything. I knew what had happened to her. This is way back from 1997, 1994, 1997. But what was I supposed to do? You can't understand somebody's scenario. You can only say, oh, that's too bad, but I can't really resonate with what happened because what do I know from my life, By the time when I was about 35, I finally started to understand my mother, Baruch Hashem. Her ways of thoughts and her ways of reaching scenarios. She was brilliant. My father's also smart, but my mother was brilliant. Sometimes hardship and weird and different scenarios bring out sometimes latent attributes that we didn't know that they had, but she was brilliant. So I find I'm almost 42 years old, 41, and something like that. I was born in 83, 84. The reason why I say 83, 84 is because I died dead on the table. I had 3 holes in my heart. They were repaired by a heart specialist. They flew in from Texas, a Catholic. I think he was Jewish, a Jewish Catholic doctor. They did at the time, a coarctation of the aorta, and I had holes in my left ventricle. So at that time, they predicted that I was supposed to die by the time I was 35. They did not think I would survive the heart. That's why I continue to work out, things like that, because it's good for my health. So I bought this for my brother after I had nothing. I didn't have anything. what am I doing buying a fancy gift that was only $20 or $25 on Amazon? What was I doing buying? I bought kosher beef jerky off Amazon because when you have nothing, the study of Torah, I had nothing but the study of Torah and a couple of good ideas and a couple of things of technology that I could build. Nobody would really give me the appropriate amount of funding to build these things, you see. Now I have a little bit more money and I have a lot more ideas, so I'm working on these things. But I bought this for $25 from my brother off Amazon. And it was important to me. It may not be as important to him because the reason why it was important to me for him, because I remember this is when I had nothing. When I really had nothing, I had no money. I was like, I have nothing. So maybe I can spend a little bit to help out this person who is important to me. And he doesn't keep it with him. He says, well, maybe it's better in your safekeeping because it was important to you for me. Because he thinks he's a different person than me. You see, he thinks differently than me. So this was important when I had nothing. This book over here cost me about $50. I'm not going to say it's more important than this, but this is also just as important as that book because I know what the book says. I'm going to explain those things in a second here. I know what those things say, especially when I reopen it and I start explaining the definitions of what is a Jew. So in Nidan 9a, it says it's a little bit of a blunt line, but it's technically the study of Torah is what makes a Jew a Jew. Now, if you are actually Jewish, according to some definitions, then the study of Torah, the Zohar, the Tosfos, illuminates the soul because there is a saying is what is thought, so what portion of whatever thinks. Well, technically, the brain does the thinking, obviously, but so does the body. It's Kabbalistic, you see. The body also thinks because the brain is just the epicenter, so to speak, of all the other bodies. So all the body thinks. It helps the brain think. But what is actually doing the thinking? Like if you are dying or if you're already dead, the soul leaves the body. So the information is contained in the soul that arrives to planet Earth from who knows where. So the mind, there's a differentiation between the brain and the mind, you see. So the mind is where the soul is, where the thoughts are contained. The soul enters into the body and it does the thinking for the brain and the different ligaments and organs and the everything. So the entire human, that does the thinking, believe it or not. It's a little bit strange to explain it that because according to science, how they typically explain things, they can only see what they don't know what the soul says. You see what the mind of the human being. So again, I first started studying Torah online in about 2010. I was really fortunate. I started to watch this guy Tovia Singer. And I bought some of his books later called Let's Get Biblical. Tovia Singer's source is mentioned in Parshat Chukas in chapter 19, the first 5 paragraphs there, about King Hezekiah. So this is in defense of the way of the Torah, a defense of the Torah, the 5 books of Moshe, defense of how the rabbis or the sages would explain things, you see. So in this week's Torah portion, Parshat Chukas, it has an original. Some people say that's the original source, Job and Ecclesiastes. It's not really mentioned in that way in the Torah very much, but the original source technically is from the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Moshe, the oral tradition at Mount Sinai. This is what the rabbis would say, the oral tradition at Mount Sinai, what Moshe heard at Mount Sinai, and then the written Torah. The other versions of the religion, or the other completely different religions, Islam, Christianity, various other sectarian movements related to the Avrahamic religions, Avraham, Yaakov, and Yitzhak, Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, or something like that. And the Akedah, the binding of Abraham. Some people think that those things happen literally. Some people say it's more of a explanation of things. In the beginning, it does matter the interpretation. But if you take it too seriously, this is why we have scenarios that occur. Global events revolve around these religions and the interpretations all throughout history. Um, so I'm going to explain Hezekiah real quick, for the sake of Tovia, for Tovia Singer's little explanation. And but world events, there's a book by Axelrod that did a calculation of, because if you study in university or with other people, historians, they say, well, what are the reasons for wars? And they say, well, it's probably because of religion. And I say, that's a little bit true. That was the typical answer. But Axelrod came along and said, actually, it's because of more of the percentage. The reason for it was more of because of resources like food, water, supply. And then beyond that, the top 10 attributes, the top 10 commandments, and the ancillary things to the top 10 commandments: jealousy, lust, greed, non-keeping of the Shabbos, things like that, worshiping, going after other things, and the explanations that go along with that. So the top 10 are also a little bit meagerly important. Okay, the top 10 rules, and the top 10 rules are pervasive in all three religions. This is why the religions are more respected than not, but there's differentiations between the religions. So a simple explanation in the defense of the rabbis and the Torah is what? Well, King Hezekiah. So if you look at Isaiah chapter 20, what is it? Isaiah 48 through 52 or 53, depending on your version of the regular Bible, and people's opinions. The number one and number two best-selling book of all time, the Bible. There's a discussion in a Council of Nicaea and a Council of Trent, and this is on the Greek Gregorian calendar, 423 to 500 BCE, or whatever timescale they used then. The Nicene Council of Trent, they had these people that didn't know, they weren't necessarily Jewish. Maybe some of them were Jewish, but most of them were non-Jews. So the story goes, they got together and they tried to figure out how to interpret some things. They had this fishing guy. They said that he supposedly existed, and some things happened. And what did they do? So they were configuring some of the laws and things like that for this new religion, because there was very sectarian movements that occurred. You see. So this is with Christianity and also Islam, but more with Christianity. I know the Christian version of these things. What they do is they look back into the Old Testament. They pick a person and they try to go to find little things in the Old Testament. They call it the Old Testament, to prove that they are right or wrong. And so this is their mistake, according to Tovia Singer and lots of other people. So they have no proof. They just try to, I'm not going to say they make things up, but there was, So anyways, man, that is a fart, just so you know. Sometimes I do it. Okay. I said, drink gas, you guys. Methane gas? That's cows emit methane gas. Oh, that's funny this is about the red cow. Oh, the red heifer. Oh, the ashes. This is about the concept of the Messiah. This is why I'm mentioning this. And so there's different explanations about the Messiah. So if you study Israeli Chabad and things like that, or other portions of the religion, you discover that every day there is something that saves you from something else. It always could have been better, or it could have been worse. Could have been better, but it could have been worse. So there is always something of that day that says, it says in our prayers, it says, when you perform a mitzvah, a minor or a major one, you gain yourself a single advocate. When you perform a transgression, you gain for yourself perhaps an accuser. So fairly or unfairly. So you see what I mean? So if you study the Torah, or if you were Jewish, or if the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the creator of the universe, or the rabbis say, we want you to know this Torah. I was like, oh, really? Well, who are you to tell me that? I thought I had my own choice in the world. It's like, you'll see when you study the Torah, you will really enjoy it, because you are as smart as us, or maybe you could have been one of us, but you had different scenarios in your life. You see what I mean? So this is why my study of Torah was important. You see, at least to me, And so they say, well, so in other words, so this is how this. So it's a system of a little bit perplexing scenario. They say a paradox. So there's a lot of things that are called paradoxes. So what is the connection? Or what is the there is no there's things that are no, where there are contradictions, obviously, but it says no contradiction, because it's explaining two different concepts, but the explanation of both of the ideas are seemingly at odds with each other. You see, but because the root of their soul, or the purpose for existence, is supposedly something else. So one tribe and nation has an explanation that is actually antithetical to the other tribe, believe it or not. But they both work together. So in one way, a nation is doing their job and they're doing it really well, or maybe they made mistakes doing their job, but it's in contradiction to the people that have a different kind of job, and who, I'm not going to say made mistakes. They try to say you made mistakes, but your mistakes had an impact on the person's life on the actual world. Their mistakes supposedly may have had an impact in Shemaim, either on one side or the other. So it's a little bit complicated. You see what I mean? So anyways, back to Hezekiah, the king Hezekiah. Isaiah wasn't, the last portion of Isaiah chapter 48 through 52 or 53, their main thing that some of these people use to try to prove their messianic figure or whatever, right? The JC, he must have been a good-looking dude, because they wanted him to die. He must have had a way with all the ladies, and so maybe some of the rabbis, they didn't look as good as whatever. And so maybe he had a way with the ladies, and they got a little bit jealous, and they said, listen, this guy's existence on planet Earth, because the ladies seem to like him a little bit, or something like that. That's probably what happened, in my guess, if it's at all accurate. Some people say, like Rabbi Tovia, he says, I think none of it even happened. That's his point of view, right? So there are different opinions. So Isaiah chapter 48 through 52 or 53, it wasn't necessarily originally, it wasn't even, some say it wasn't originally a part of the canon, the Old Testament. It wasn't even included. That was added in there a little bit later in history, like in year 700 or 800 on the Greek Gregorian calendar, right? And then, of course, if you look at what it says, if you read through that, and you say, wow, that really does talk about that guy, really. I was like, really? There was lots of people like that in that time period, because they are unstudied. I'm not going to say they're ignorant, but they just didn't study. Nobody ever told them they didn't study. They didn't take the time to think about it, because the purpose of their soul was for something else, So Tovia Singer says, well, who's the king of Israel? King Hezekiah is who they were most likely talking about in that portion of Isaiah. And so it's mentioned in the Simple Stone edition. So was Hezekiah a Jew? Yes, King Hezekiah was Jewish. I think he was Jewish. I'm not for certain. I don't see the number one best-selling book of all time being about King Hezekiah, do you? And so who is the Messiah? Some people's opinion is saying that every Jew was the Messiah. And I was like, that's a little bit arrogant. And so Israeli Chabad teaches something that says, well, technically it's much more complicated and brilliant and illuminating than that simple saying. Because what if everybody was Jewish? If everybody converted to Judaism, what would be the point of the rabbis? They would be meaningless and pointless. You see, so it's illumination of some things. You see, so in other words, what is a Jew? The study of Torah. So this is when we go into entities and things that have existed that are a little bit mystical, right? And where you say, well, you see the study of Torah, put this down for a second. The study of Torah encompasses contains all of the mitzvos. This is also in one of their sayings. So if you're worried about accomplishing the mitzvos, if you're studying and speaking in Torah, this is accomplishing a good thing, in the world. It is better to speak the words of Torah. However, if speaking and also performing the mitzvahs of Torah causes various whatever scenarios to occur that people didn't know about or whatever, then Baruch Hashem, you did a tikkun in somebody else's world, and maybe a tikkun in your own world. Now, a part of being human is what's called a livelihood and money and greed, and things like that. these things, depending on what person's, some people are, I'm a little bit, I tend to be, could be potential. I'm not really greedy, but I think I often, because I used to have a lot of more money than I have now, for a livelihood and to live a fuller life, and or managing a business and things like that. A sizable amount. As I mentioned before, my businesses were probably valued at about $4 to $5 million. I had one of my best months was about $45,000 net or gross or something like that. This is back in 2013 or 2014 or something like that. I had my job at Citrix. I was pulling almost $100,000 a year at my job, and this is, if you look at inflationary numbers, it's about a 20 to 30% inflation on some of those corporate jobs. You see, and then 25 to 35 to $40,000, and this is when I was like 28 or 29 years old. You see. So I went into these other startups. I had two other startups. So the problem with my startups is I had a couple of unofficial business partners, consultants, and things like that. There's a company out of Florida that was managing my legal network. I was what's called an affiliate or a white label of their services. So I did really well with that. And so the conundrum was the service levels were a little bit questionable. They actually, in 2014 or something like that, they shut down that division for what's called for personal memberships because they felt like they couldn't service the members properly. And so I paused that type of company for a while to see how I could remanage it and scale it, because I had another startup that I started to focus on that was almost ready to do really, really well. And so I heavily invested into that startup because they had a lot of deals coming through. I was kind of like a consultant for the company. It was with a good buddy of mine. A good buddy, yeah. And this guy who also was on the LA Water and board of LA Water and Power, things like that. Randy, or something like that. And so anyways, I invested a little bit of money, a sizable amount, and some time and effort and things like that. And supposedly they said that they got sued. Their supplier got sued by PG&E or something, and so they were not able to offer services in the same way. So I bought these electronics because we were going to sign people up at people's door, because before that they were doing things on paper and things like that. So we had this door-to-door team. I invested in a call center. Believe it or not, the way that we were going to, because I bought some ads, the way we were marketing through the Roseman law was actually made illegal. It's not allowable according to the U.S. government. And this is right before I actually launched some of the marketing, and it did work. I had some contract employees and things like that in a small office, a couple of small offices, one in Stockton, one in Santa Barbara, one or two in Santa Barbara, and things like that. And a bunch of people. I was contributing to about 45 to 50 people's livelihoods, the way that they earned their revenue in the world. And they were going to be able to have actual jobs, real jobs in the world, you see. We had more people sign up to actually sell. We had upwards of 750 or something like that people, that we could, if they did well, that they could even earn more, either official contract employees or affiliates and things like that. So on a way, however, the Roseman law made something not permissible. It was the Roseman law in Nevada that got in the way of one of the designs, and a different law, I don't remember the name of that law, that disallowed. It has to do with the way things were marketed at the time, you see. So I had that investment was a total loss, so it just is what it is. So in other words, you never know. People make these plans, especially in business, but there's business, it's a big world out there, so you never know what happens. So when people say I failed at that, and somebody says, boy, you were not very good at that, were you? It's like, well, believe it or not, I was excellent. I was one of the best, if not the I was on my way to becoming the best, or maybe I was already the best, because of some regulator, some law somewhere beyond my capacity to know about beforehand or be in control of. We just weren't able to do more than we did. So I kind of receded back into the world and said, oh my goodness, the world is a small world, but the world of law is vast, So I really did study the Torah, and I actually enjoy the study of Torah. I listened to the radio and the rabbis, and I studied all kinds of things for years and years and years. I didn't get any official certification. I had a friend of mine that mentioned the word certification. I guess he knew that I had some of these people that were Jewish, that were my friends. He really did help me out on a tough moment. But at the same time, I suffered under potentially these various accusations, and so it wasn't very fun for me. It was difficult for me for those things to happen. Just so you know. And so, on one hand, I'm ungrateful, believe it or not. But on the other hand, on a different side of me, I'm saying, well, technically, it was a bunch of whatever violations, and so it is a little bit. It's called. This is where there's a paradox, perplexing, and one could say contradictions, but there's contradictions depending on where you're at in the world. It's like, well, what were they supposed to do? This is what the system that was in place, and we were told this about this person, and they were told that, and there was a bunch of bad information from other states and other places, and so then that's when people start pointing the finger of this, that, and whose fault. And I was like, look, then there was people that got in bad information and events, the noise that happened, and I said what happened according to protocol, and they said, well, maybe you're going to learn something about how protocol kind of was modified when the world shut down, and some areas didn't mind their constantly sidestepped the protocol and whatever, and they wanted to be strict with me. I was like, but you're strict with me and not strict with them. That's ridiculous. And he's like, well, we were told we could be strict with them. Like, well, who said that? That's called a subterfuge or a violation of law. So, and some people say, if you're going to be strict with me, I will be strict with you, and that involves a financial payout from lawsuits. You see what I mean? Especially if adversarial scenarios happen post facto. So, in other words, So this is why Muslims say, well, we agree with what you say about Isaiah 52 through 53. We say, well, it's a different angel that appeared. This is where Muhammad becomes meagerly important. And the Jews say, well, we don't believe that either. There has to be, we believe it, we think the sages are right. We listen to the rabbis. And you see, because that's the origination, the rabbis are the origination, the oral tradition of the origination of the religion of Judaism, you see. So these Muslims come along. I don't know much about the religion. Some people say that Hashem, they serve us, it's the same entity, but a different side of that entity. Some people say, we don't even bother to say that. We say that they're violation of the first commandment, things like that. And some of the way that they view things cause bad things happen in the world, and there's a lot of them that are like that and things like that. So this is revolving around some things that are in current events in this world. So anyways, and there's different, I don't know much about them. So I don't know much. And I'm not going to learn. There's not enough time in the day to learn things. And so I studied the Torah and the Zohar and the other books, you see. But some of these books were translated from other languages like Arabic, or things where because some of these people that, believe it or not, throughout history, even some of the great rabbis, some of those people actually did convert to other religions. So some of the Jews, during different dispersions and exiles, some converted to Christianity for the sake of survival, for the sake of other reasons. Some converted to a different religion. Some became atheists, So what is a Jew? The study of Torah, depending on who you're connected, and this is a theory, this is where the theory gets a little bit interesting. Depending on who you're connected to in the world and their level of study, and the words and entities of one Jew is important to the other Jews that exist in the world. This is a little bit where it gets perplexing, or it becomes fascinating, you see, because as I speak the words of Torah, let's say there's a rabbi that actually knows back to front and front to back all the books, what they say, and they can look up all the sources, and they can try to, but they are in hidden rooms, lots of them. Sometimes they don't even work standardized jobs. They have survived, their families have survived for generations. Some of them have wealth, some of them are simple, or some of them live simply and are poor. And a bunch of different countries all around the world, you see. And so does my Torah study important to them? Perhaps they are trying to figure out something in Torah that they could not figure out, something extremely complicated, like an extremely complicated algorithm. And some guy comes along who's just beginning in Torah, or maybe he knows I know what I know. There's a bunch of things that I don't know, you see, and there's some things that I'm still learning. It comes along and says something, well, I recently figured out something in my brain that I really toiled in Torah. I toiled and toiled and toiled in Torah. You see, toiled in years for years and lots of hard things. I kept up with it. I kept it. I kept with it. And some rabbi, another person who's also brilliant, says, I also studied, toiled in Torah. Nothing of those bad things happened to me. Our books say that's the reason why those bad things happen to you. And it's like, what if it's the other people's mistakes? And they say, I didn't think about that. Let me go back and study and think about how things should be, the levying of either payment or justice according to some scenarios. You see, and so I come along, and because of my study of Torah, it helps that person who is a true study, also a study of Torah, student of Torah, up there in age, maybe even considered a sage. And what can my word impact them successfully to help them configure something new in the world or something insightful in the world? Baruch Hashem. So in a strange way, for a moment in time, I was at the person's level in the study of Torah. But they can repeat back all these books, perhaps like I can say what it says in the Torah, the explanations. So the Torah goes on and on and on and on. And this is based on only 5 meager paragraphs, less than a couple of sentences in the Torah. But the reason why it's important, because the Stone edition of the Torah, it rarely explains, it doesn't, the sources are almost never, they almost are not ever actually, mostly they are sages or rabbis or books or portions in rabbinical books. But rarely does it actually cite a passage from Job and Ecclesiastes, you see. So this week's Torah passage is more connected to the other religions that exist, you see, like Christianity and Islam and things like that, and other religions as well. So this is why it's important for me to give a recording that's what's called an extended talk, both in defense of the Torah and to help clarify. The question is often more important than the answer, but the answer is also just as important as the question, because the answer, the additional question and additional thought helps you clarify what the other things are. So the Dan 9a, the bloodline, what is a Jew? To answer Rabbi F's, to pose a different perception of Rabbi F's, one of the questions he asked me all those years ago in near Las Vegas in Nevada. He is a Rosh Yeshiva, I think, now in another state. He probably travels around, I guess. He is famous. He is a famous rabbi. Yeah, he is famous among Torah scholars. So, Baruch Hashem. And, and Sheldon, he is also famous. He is famous for me, you see. So they become known in the world if they stick to it. So, Baruch Hashem, congratulations. And so this is on Shabbos, especially on Shabbos, and also other days. You may not know, but when I'm walking around and I'm doing, oftentimes I'm thinking about something. So if something comes up and whatever distracts me, it is a little bit kind of like, look, I was thinking about this Torah, so what are you doing? You're making big mistakes with me. You see? So anyways, thanks for listening. And my name is Andrew Graham, or Andrew C. Graham. I hope you enjoyed this simple recording. And I'm going to go ahead and finish my reading of the Torah. Sometimes it will be a little bit quicker because I run out of, it's called brain energy to read slowly the line, because it would take all day. It takes years to study even to really know and dissect the every line and every word, especially in Hebrew. I mean, what about in Hebrew? Eliyahu Navi, when did they had to fill in some of the words, this for the state of, in Israel, modern Hebrew, there's a difference even between rabbinic Hebrew and modern Hebrew. They had to fill in some of the words, Eliyahu Navi in 1870, or some say 1839 or whatever. You had to fill in some words that did not exist so they could even read the different version of Hebrew. So, what is a letter? Every letter has different meanings depending on a number, where it is in the sentence. Where, if it's where it is in the word, the arrangement of the letters, the numbers corresponding to the letters. The truest, more pure study of Torah, this is just a simple overview. This is scratching the surface. It's extremely illuminating. It's really complicated, you see. So one Hebrew letter, like has a numerical value attached. Where is it in the word? And then they have these other discussions say, well, some of these things have been filled in. So although the rules of those letters are applicable based on other rules, they say, well, that was filled in this time period in 1870 or whatever. And so what did the rabbis' sources, it's like, and then they go into this thing, well, my family knows for a fact that was inaccurate. And these are the yeshiva discussions they have both in other countries and also less in the States because there's not that, but these are the brilliant discussions that nobody cares about or nobody knows about. People care, but they're supposed to care about it, that nobody really knows about, you see. And so, but to even actually have that portion of discussion, you have to be really knowledgeable in these things. You have to know the language word by word. You have to know you have to study the Gemara, the numerical value. These people, the real rabbis, some of them, some of them actually know these things, and it sounds fancy. It sounds really fancy. If you're a surface level student if you've gone to various services for religion, it sounds like a big deal. But that's what some of these people, they have dedicated their whole lives to knowing these things, you see. I didn't go that in depth into the study. I could, but I said, well, look, I used to be really good at business, and so it was. We have enough people like that, and you're getting up there in age, so you better go ahead and do what you can in business, And so, anyways, again, thanks for listening, and Baruch Hashem. Enjoy your learning. I'm going to enjoy mine, and again, happy Father's Day, Baruch Hashem.